إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Today's class will not be too long, but inshallah it will be informative. As we mentioned after the salah, the intention tonight is to go through a hadith that many of us have heard many times, but there might be some misunderstanding concerning some parts of this hadith. So to make it clear, the hadith in question is the hadith where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that there will be 7 groups of people that will be underneath the shade of Allah on the day that there is no shade. Okay. This is a known hadith, an authentic hadith reported by both Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim rahimahumullah, and this hadith is usually used in order to encourage people to be from amongst these 7 groups. So first of all, it's 7 groups of people. It is not 7 individuals as such, but it is groups, categories that a person, if you strive hard enough, you can become one of them. And on top of that, it shows the beauty of Islam, that a person, no matter what family you're born into, no matter how noble or not noble you are, no matter what country you're born in, these 7 categories are categories that anyone can achieve if they work hard enough. And on top of that as well is that this hadith, you will notice how each category that is mentioned by the Prophet ﷺ, it is not something easy, because if it was easy, then many people would be able to achieve it. But it says specifically 7 categories of people, and this is something that separates people in the sense that it is very, very difficult. The part of the hadith that people often confuse or misunderstand, and this is very important, is where it says that they will be underneath the shade of Allah on the day that there is no shade. Now some people have understood it to mean the shade of Allah in a literal sense, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a shade. And many scholars in Islam, they've highlighted that this is the incorrect understanding, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. Why is it the incorrect understanding of saying that this is literally the shade of Allah? For many reasons. The main reason that the scholars give is that what creates shadow, as we know it, is the sun or a light source. That is what casts the shadow when an object comes in front of it and then the shadow comes. Because of that, the scholars have said that if it is the shadow of Allah, then it means that the sun would be above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is impossible, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Khaliq, He is the creator, and the sun is the makhluq, that which is created. Even more than that is that these shadows that we see being cast by objects, this is how physics works in the created world, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that has created everything. Allahu khaliqu kulli shay. Allah Azza wa Jal has created everything. And Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the one who has dictated the physics of how things interact. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not bound by physics in the way that we understand it. If Allah Azza wa Jal is the creator, He can decide on what is possible. Right? So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not confined by the physics of the created world. So we do not have any knowledge of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it were possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a shadow. So because of the lack of knowledge we have, we remain silent and we do not speak about it unless we have evidence. So this is the main issue that people often do not understand. They think that it means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a shadow when we know, when we do not have that knowledge. And then the question is, what shadow does the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaking about? The scholars in Islam, they have difference of opinion. They say this is a shadow that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create on that day for the believers. In the same way that Allah Azza wa Jal creates everything else, He will create a specific shadow that will protect the believers on that day from the heat of the sun. Others, they said this is the shadow, the dhil of the arsh. And many scholars have preferred this opinion. And the reason for that shadow is on that day there will be no other shadow. Not only that, but in other hadith it is mentioned that the sun will be brought close. And it will be brought so close that people will start to sweat. And that sweat will be in terms of their sins and their wrongdoings. And it's specifically mentioned in the hadith that some people, their sweat will reach half of their legs, some to their knees, some to their hips, the waist, the armpits, the shoulders. Some, their sweat will reach to their mouths, and they will struggle to breathe. And some will be completely drowning in their own sweat. So this is the state of people during that time, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, He creates this shadow that gives shelter to those who fall underneath these 7 categories. And just to remind ourselves quickly about these categories, and this is something good that we try to encourage and teach our children to strive and be from amongst these, is the first one is a just ruler. A just ruler, Imamun Adil. Okay? And remember in the beginning how I said that this is something difficult, hard to achieve, because it almost seems like the Prophet ﷺ is mentioning 2 opposites. Right? How so? If you think about it, a just ruler, if a ruler becomes a ruler and they have the power and they have the authority, especially back in the day, there were not many people that could keep that ruler in check. Today we might have checks and balances, right? But before, especially back in the day, if you were the ruler, you were the ultimate ruler. No one could come close to you. There was no such thing as elections. There was no such thing as opposing the ruler. Either you successfully remove the ruler, or if you fail, that means you're dead. Right? So if a person has that high level of authority, and there's no one that is above him in their mind, then it is very difficult for that person to be just. In order to be just in such a situation, most likely it shows that this person has a good heart. Because now you have an option. And this is what this hadith really is talking about, is to choose the right thing when you have an option. Some people, we don't really grasp how great this is, because without the option, there is no real fitna. There's not really the same test and trial, right? For example, let's say a poor person, right? They're very poor. Even if they wanted to indulge in haram and do evil, they're limited in their capacity, right? They can do certain things, but the things that need money, the things that need wealth, they can't, because they don't have that option. So if a rich person stops themselves from committing the haram that they have options to do, then the reward is greater. So here you see a king or a ruler that is just, even though history tells us that just kings and rulers, they're very few in number. So much so that in the Quran itself, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the just ruler. When Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about Dhul Qarnayn, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. And even as a side note, the scholars, they say that Dhul Qarnayn, there's difference of opinion, but a good portion of the scholars, they say he was not a prophet. Dhul Qarnayn was not a prophet, but yet he is mentioned in the Quran by name. Why? Because like Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he said Dhul Qarnayn was rajulun salih. He was a pious man. Not only that, Allah Azza wa Jalla says مَكَّنَّاهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ, that Allah Azza wa Jalla established him on earth, meaning gave him power. Whereas when Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about other pious people, Allah Azza wa Jalla speaks about آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. When Allah Azza wa Jalla is speaking about the prophets and those who were given prophethood. So the just rulers and kings are very few, and often their mention is recorded in history. We have that other example of the Prophet ﷺ when he speaks about Najashi, even though Najashi at that time was a non-Muslim, he was a Christian, right? Yet the Prophet ﷺ told his companions, this man is a just man, he's a just ruler and a king. And then you have Shab Nasha'a fi ibadatillah. And again, it means a young person, someone that is a youth that grew up with the religion or the worship of Allah. And again, notice how it is almost the opposite, it's options. When you're young, you have so much energy, you have so much that you could do wrong. Right? If a young person wants to do wrong, he can do a lot of wrong. If an old person wants to do evil, again, he's restricted. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ is emphasizing on that when you get options, and there's other hadith that explain this, that when you get options, the reward is greater if you have the ability, because it shows restraint. It shows that you have restraint, that you can do the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. And this is why some of the pious people before, they used to say the one teardrop that comes from one young man or young woman, it is more beloved to Allah than if 1,000 old men or women cry. Why? Because again, it's that difference, that these old people, they might not have the same opportunities or the same tests and trials, whereas the young person, he chose to go to the masjid. They chose to grow up with the religion, with the worship of Allah. And again, one of the best ways of helping our children in the next generation is by providing them that opportunity. Many of us, we might look back, right? And we might think to ourselves, I wish I had done things different. I wish I had spent more time in the masjid. I wish I had memorized more Quran. I wish. But there is still hope, especially in the next generation. If you put in the effort, if you help not only your children, but you help all the other children in the neighborhood, in the community, then that will help you. You'll get part of that reward, and you'll help this person become one of these 7 groups of people. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, and a person who وَرَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ, and a person whose heart is attached to the masjid. Okay. Some people, again, they misunderstand this and they think that it means that a person who is literally 24/7 inside the masjid. But that is not necessarily the case. We're actually encouraged as Muslims to go out and seek our sustenance, right? And not spend all our time in the masjid. There's no concept of being a monk in Islam, right? That you seclude yourself from the world. Yes, you can do so for i'tikaf, a number of days, a small short period of time, but you have to go out and seek your sustenance. And this is why Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu, in that famous story, he saw a young man who was sitting in the masjid all the time. And he came up to him and he said, I see you sitting in the masjid for so long. What is your story? What is your case? And the man, he said, my brother, he works, he seeks the rizq, and I sit here in the masjid and I worship Allah. And then Umar, he disciplined the man, and he told the man, get up and seek your sustenance. Okay. So this is something that is not part of the religion. However, what this hadith actually refers to is the person who, even when they're outside and they're doing their job outside or whatever they might be doing, their hearts is still connected to the masjid. They think about the masjid. And like we've said many times in the past, the masjid does not belong to any individual, it does not belong to any organization, it does not belong to any group of people. By being connected to the masjid, a person is in reality being connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you think about it, people, they come and go, right? If your allegiance is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah azza wa jalla is always there. Today, a group of people that you see eye to, they're responsible of the masjid. Tomorrow, that might change. But a person's allegiance to the masjid should not change. Because by helping the masjid, you're helping the religion of Allah. And if you, for whatever reason, don't see eye to eye with certain people, then you still have a responsibility. That you try to advise, you try to help in the capacity that you have. But we should never be amongst those people who abandon the masjid or abandon the khair, the good, just because we have personal disputes with people. Because this is how the religion of Allah is neglected. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَرَجُلَانِ تَحَابَا فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَا عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَا عَلَيْهِ. That 2 men, and the scholars have said this is true for women as well, that 2 men who meet for the sake of Allah. Okay? They love each other for the sake of Allah, they meet because of it, and they depart because of it. And this is something that is easier said than done. If you think about the people that you know in your life, many of them, the ones that are very close to you, they're close to you for a reason. They're from the same country as you. You speak the same language. You grew up together. You have mutual friends. Some people you might know from work. But it is very few people who truly establish a friendship for the sake of Allah. And we all like to think that we love each other for the sake of Allah. But the reality sometimes is different. Right? And it's not something that, it's not an easy task to achieve. Right? It is not easy. It takes time. In the same way that any other friendship, you don't just become friends with someone. You have to put in the effort. You get to know the person. You connect with the person. And again, if this was easy, then everyone would be part of this category. But it is not. And the Prophet ﷺ is praising this group of people, that they love each other for the sake of Allah, they meet and they depart for the sake of Allah. Sometimes you have to depart for the sake of Allah, right? Because imagine now, you have a friend, right? This friend you met during good times, and after a while they fell off. They stopped practicing, or they started doing evil, right? Now, your responsibility as a Muslim is to advise, is to bring the person close and do as much as you can. But let's say you've exhausted all venues, everything that you can do, and you start noticing that this person is actually affecting you. What is your responsibility then? Then you have to make a red line. You have to tell the person, either you stop the evil that you're doing, or I will leave you. It's as simple as that. So now the problem is that for many of us, if our connection wasn't for the sake of Allah, we don't make that. We oversee the transgressions that the person is doing against Allah. Oh, this person is my blood brother. This person is from my country. We speak the same language. This person I've known for 10, 15 years, right? But if it really was for the sake of Allah, then you bring the person close. And also when it comes to friendship, and this is just a side note, we in Islam were taught to always have moderation. Always have moderation. That when we love someone with moderation. And when we hate someone with moderation. Why? Because things might change. Tomorrow, the person that you couldn't stand at all, they might change. And then you love that person. And the opposite, your closest friend might become an open enemy to Allah and His Messenger. You try your best, but if the person is not changing, then you have to take a stance. So moderation is part of the religion, especially when it comes to love, because if it goes in excess, then it creates many problems and it could actually lead to shirk. If a person loves a person too much and it becomes like the person becomes blind and they follow this person out of love and they do the wrong things, in certain circumstances it could lead to being part of the biggest sin. And then we have the man, and some scholars they've said women were a woman too, who is called by the opposite sex. In this specific wording, it is a woman who calls a man who, this woman, she has high status and she has beauty. And then the man says, Inni akhafullah, I fear Allah. And again, imagine how difficult this is. Many of us, the only thing that stops us from a situation like that is because no one wants us, right? But imagine a person that has this taqwa, that if this happened, they would be reminding themselves and that other person, and they would say, Inni akhafullah. And by that statement, the scholars, they say, the person is reminding themselves and that woman or that man. And this is what is required. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَرَجُلٌ تَصَدَّقَ بِصَدَقَةٍ, and a man who gave sadaqah, charity, and he kept it hidden, secret, until his left hand did not know what his right hand gave. And in some narrations it's the opposite, the other way around. His right hand did not know what his left hand gave. Okay? Now, the point of interest here is, first of all, you have giving sadaqah, charity. This is something that is not easy. It is difficult. On top of that, the person kept it a secret. The person kept it a secret. Often when we give sadaqah, we do so in public to show people, I'm generous. Or once we've given the sadaqah, we tell people, right? So this person is hiding it. And he's not hiding it from just people, but he's keeping it so secret that his hands don't even know. And this is a way for the Prophet ﷺ to show how secret it is. They might even keep it hidden from their close family. The person's own wife doesn't know. And there's so many stories of the pious people from before that they would feed poor people and clothe them, sometimes for 40, 50 years. And their own children did not know. No one knew. Only they knew and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the scholars, they highlight on a separate issue, they say they encourage people to at least have one deed, or better yet, a few deeds that no one else knows about. Only you and Allah. Because the more secret a deed is, the more sincere it is, and the more sincere a deed is, the more likely it is to be accepted by Allah. So, if, yes, you should have the normal form of worship where you come to the masjid, you fast in Ramadan, you do all those things that are a must, right? But you try to have a separate portfolio, right? When they speak about investments and these kind of things, they say you should spread the risk, right? And different portfolios and baskets and so on, right? When it comes to ibadah, you don't want to put everything, all your hard work, in just one aspect. You try to diversify. You try to do things that perhaps you might be the only person that can fulfill that particular role. And it does not only have to be with sadaqah, with charity. It can be anything. You can take on the responsibility to help people who might face problems in their marriage. Just as an example, you become an intermediate, some sort of counselor, or you help connect between two friends, people who have fallen out. You come and you try to rectify it, but you don't make it into a big deal. And there's so many other things that you can do. So the best way is to find something that is secret, that no one else knows about other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then finally, the last point, and we'll conclude with this. وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهِ, a man who remembers Allah, خَالِيًا, alone, there's no one else around him. فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ, and because of him remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the punishment of Allah, the reward of Allah, everything that pertains to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we know about, the person remembers Allah. Perhaps he does so just by sitting quietly, perhaps he does so whilst making dua, perhaps he does so while reciting the Quran. In whatever way it is, when he remembers Allah, he starts crying. And his eyes, it says literally, they become overwhelmed, they overflow with tears. Right? And if you think about that and you compare it to our state today, it is very far from it. That we hear the same Quran that was recited at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but we don't shed a tear. And Imam al-Nawawi, and we've mentioned this before, he said a very beautiful statement. He said, rahimahullah, that if you are unable to cry when the Quran is being recited, then cry for your inability to cry for the Quran, because that is a loss in itself. People before us, they used to cry because the Quran moved them. It moved their heart and their mind. But today we cry because the same Quran does not move us in the same way. So if a person remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he finds himself or herself in this state that they cry, then it is a good sign, and also inshallah this person will be amongst these groups of 7 people that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in this hadith. So inshallah with that we will conclude today's short class.